Imagine a weapon so powerful even water couldn't stop its flames, or an artillery piece capable of obliterating the most formidable tanks of its time, and then bombs that could demolish an entire apartment block without even a direct hit. Throughout history, humans have designed some truly terrifying weapons, each engineered to strike fear and crush defenses. In today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're diving deep into the most feared weapons mankind has ever created. Number 15. War Elephants. Elephants might seem like gentle giants, but ancient armies turned those docile beasts into what could only be described as battle tanks. Around the 4th century BC, Indian armies began capturing and training young elephants, transforming them into war machines. This practice was the first attempt to create the ultimate superweapon, one that could trample through enemy lines and terrify anyone in its path. The first recorded combat use of war elephants came during Alexander the Great's attempted conquest of India. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, Macedonian troops were faced with hundreds of massive war elephants, armored and charging, crashing directly at them. After breaking through their lines, the war elephants easily trampled and gored the Macedonians. The only hope for the Macedonians was to kill the elephants' mahouts or blind the beasts, causing them to flee. The surviving mahouts desperately trying in vain to kill their elephants before they caused an equal amount of destruction amongst the Indian forces. The Macedonians brought these war elephants back to Europe and the Middle East, changing the face of battle. Number 14. Roman Gladius. The Roman Gladius was an enduring symbol of Rome's dominance and military might. Introduced as the standard weapon of the legionnaires around the 3rd century BC, the Gladius was a masterpiece of simplicity and efficiency. The compact, ergonomic design allowed quick, close-range strikes that turned every soldier into a formidable force. With a length of only around 18 to 24 inches, the Gladius was a very short sword for the time period. Combined with the Roman tactic of tight formations, the Gladius became the quintessential Roman weapon while on campaign. This weapon struck fear into the hearts of many would-be Roman enemies. It was the personification of the discipline and efficiency of the Roman legionnaires. But while the Gladius might have helped Rome conquer entire nations, the Byzantines created a weapon that could literally melt any fleet in the world. Number 13. Greek Fire. With Constantinople as their seafront capital, the Byzantine Empire knew they needed a weapon that could destroy enemy fleets before they reached the shoreline. Attacks from the water were not just possible, they were inevitable. However, the Byzantines had a secret weapon. Arab warships approached cautiously, their eyes drawn to unusual tube-like devices on Byzantine ships. Uncertain and wary, the Arab sailors inched forward. Suddenly, Byzantine ships unleashed powerful jets of flame, engulfing their enemies in fire. Water does nothing to stem the flames. The flames consume ships within seconds, and few escape the inferno. Known as Greek Fire, Byzantines used this top-secret weapon to decimate all their enemies. Initially used in naval combat, they even made the first confirmed use of man-portable flamethrowers. And if you thought this was scary, the sight of this next weapon sent chills down the spines of anyone who dared lay eyes on it. Number 12. Viking Longship. During the medieval ages, there were few things that struck more fear into the hearts of anyone who dared witness them than the Viking Longship. Known for its iconic, sleek, and slim hull design, longships were powerful naval weapons. Thanks to their sturdy yet light construction, the larger longships that came around 100 feet long could hold up to 80 heavily armed and fanatical warriors. But what made the ships even more terrifying was the fact that literally no one in mainland Europe was safe, as demonstrated during the Great Raid on Paris in 845. Thanks to the longship's shallow draft that allowed it to traverse waters as shallow as 3 feet deep, around 120 longships carrying 5,000 Vikings besieged Paris, a city roughly 200 miles inland from the English Channel. Viking raids like this have gone down in history for their swiftness and brutality. But there was another warrior class that utilized a single advancement in technology to bring kings to their knees. Number 11. Mongol Cavalry. During the 13th and 14th centuries, there was nothing more feared than the dreaded Mongol Cavalry. With their ability to never tire, traveling huge distances, and their way of luring enemies into ambushes, Mongol horse archers were a deadly and fearsome force. The Mongol horse archers weren't just skilled, they were legendary. Trained from childhood to ride and shoot with deadly accuracy, these warriors achieved feats that seemed impossible to their enemies. Equipped with 3 to 4 horses each, Mongol archers rode tirelessly, swapping mounts to keep up a relentless pace. They traveled light, carrying few provisions, and seizing whatever they needed from the lands they crossed, leaving behind a path of destruction. During the siege of Baghdad in 1258, the victorious Mongols slaughtered between 200,000 and up to 2 million civilians and soldiers alike. Because of extreme acts of brutality such as this, even in medieval times, Mongol cavalry was among the most feared throughout all of Europe. However, the English would create an even more powerful weapon that would bring that same sense of dread to the Western European battlefields. Number 10. The Longbow. During the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, the French arrived in overwhelming numbers, 25,000 soldiers and knights against 6,000 to 8,000 English. But the French faced an unexpected problem. Nearly all English soldiers wielded a weapon of terrifying power, the English longbow. This 6-foot-long bow could launch arrows that would change the course of the battle. As heavily armored French knights charged forward, a storm of arrows tore through armor and flesh. The knights and horses were cut down before they could reach the English lines. In the aftermath of this victory, the English longbow cemented itself as the most feared long-range weapon of medieval Europe. But this would soon change after the advent of cannons, which saw the birth of an even more universally feared weapon. Number 9. Grapeshot. With the invention of cannons, armies and navies gained a significant boost of firepower in battle. But European engineers weren't satisfied with a cannonball's devastating effects. They sought something even deadlier, and they found it. Known as grapeshot, these were canvas bags packed with iron balls arranged around a central rod, resembling a bunch of grapes. But despite the harmless name, grapeshot turned the battlefield into a nightmare, unleashing a hailstorm of iron that shredded anything in its path. Basically like a giant shotgun, grapeshot could take out entire rows of soldiers in a single shot. Over time, this deadly technology evolved into an even more terrifying weapon, canister shot. Like grapeshot, but packed in a steel casing with even more iron balls, canister shot scattered shards of metal across the battlefield. Whenever it was employed, it sent a shockwave of fear down soldiers' spines. And if giant shotgun blasts weren't enough, Confederate soldiers soon faced a weapon that let one Union trooper fire like a whole platoon. Number 8. Spencer Repeating Rifle. While most Civil War soldiers carried single-shot weapons, the Union Army became the first in the world to deploy a rapid-fire multi-shot weapon at scale. Known as the Spencer rifle, this 7-shot wonder gave the North a powerful edge on the battlefield. After Lincoln personally approved them in 1863, the Union Army issued around 12,000 Spencer repeating rifles and 94,000 carbine versions, mainly to cavalry troops. The effect of these weapons was immediately felt. During the Battle of Hoover's Gap in 1863, Union troopers armed with the Spencer carbine completely routed their Confederate adversaries. Union soldiers could fire up to 20 rounds a minute, while a Confederate foe might fire 2 to 3 rounds at best. Because of situations like this, armies around the world began experimenting more with multi-shot weapons, and that culminated in one of the most feared automatic weapons of the 20th century. Number 7. Maxim Machine Gun. Repeating rifles paved way for one of the deadliest weapons in history, the Maxim Machine Gun. Introduced in 1884, it was quickly adopted by the German Army, and by World War I, over 12,000 were in service. As its battlefield impact grew, Germany deployed nearly 100,000 Maxims, and it was truly devastating. On the first day of the Somme, nearly 19,000 British troops fell, largely to machine gun fire. With around 90% of German small arms ammo consumed by the Maxim, its lethal efficiency was unmatched. However, this was not the only new invention in World War I meant to kill vast numbers of troops quickly. Another one meant to make troops feel unsafe no matter the time of day or what they were doing. Number 6. Poison gas. For troops in World War I, as if dodging artillery and machine gun fire wasn't enough, there was something even worse. Imagine sleeping deep in an underground dugout, only to wake up feeling like you're drowning. Each breath makes it worse until you're fighting with all your strength just to take in the smallest gasp of air. As you look around, you see another comrade whose skin has erupted in huge blisters that make him feel like he's on fire. And these aren't even the worst ways troops were injured. In total, around 1.3 million troops from all sides were killed or injured by gas, with many suffering lifelong disabilities. Often, the odorless, colorless gas seeped into shelters and trenches and smothered the life out of troops. But despite how horrible this weapon was, at least soldiers could predict when and where it might be used, based on weather conditions. The same cannot be said for this next weapon. Number 5. U-boats. First launched in 1906, the German U-boat quickly became one of World War I's most feared weapons. Then, during Hitler's illegal rearmament in the 1930s, Nazi Germany developed an even deadlier version, whose devastating impact was soon felt by the Allies. During the war, the Allies lost about 3,500 merchant ships during the Battle of the Atlantic, most of them due to U-boats. That was about 10% of all of its merchants put to sea. With no convoys or air cover early in the war, merchant sailors were left completely alone, facing the terrifying threat of German U-boats. Though the tides eventually turned against the Nazis, about 1 in every 26 merchant sailors never returned home. This gave merchant mariners a casualty rate nearly 4 times higher than the U.S. Navy's, one of the highest of any service branch in World War II. However, while the Allies eventually turned the tides against U-boats, there was another German weapon they could do little about, even until the end of the war. Number 4. German 88mm gun. Entering service in 1933, the Germans created the Flak 88 as a heavy anti-aircraft gun that could take out high-flying enemy planes. But after World War II kicked off, the Germans soon realized that if they just lowered the weapon, it could be an incredibly effective anti-tank weapon. At the start of Operation Barbarossa, German flak crews became heroes as their guns proved highly effective at piercing the armor of the Soviet KV-1 heavy tanks and T-34s. These flak guns saw similar success in the Western Desert, punching through British Matilda tanks as well. The secret to the 88's power was its large caliber and high velocity. This meant it could attack tanks and penetrate their armor long before the tankers could fire on them. And speaking of fire, this next weapon is probably the worst fire weapon ever created in the history of warfare. Number 3. Napalm. Though napalm had been used since World War II, it didn't burn itself into the national psyche until the Vietnam War, when front-page images brought its horrors into American homes. Its terror stemmed not only from its indiscriminate nature, but from its sheer relentless brutality. Enemy troops subjected to this weapon could not get the flames off of them, thanks to the jelly-like consistency that stuck to basically everything. On top of that, the huge fireballs sucked in the surrounding oxygen. So even if you survived the initial blast, you could still perish because the napalm would literally suck the air right out of your lungs. Thankfully, due to international pressure, the U.S. has effectively stopped using such a horrific weapon. However, another nation now employs an even more indiscriminate weapon, one capable of destroying buildings without even touching them. Number 2. Thermobaric weapons. Russia has pioneered thermobaric weapons, often called vacuum bombs in the media. Originally developed during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the modern Russian military now fields the world's largest arsenal of these devastating weapons. From vehicle-launched TOS systems to air-dropped ODAB bombs and soldier-carried Shmel units, Russian forces use vacuum bombs to level entire cities. During the first and second sieges of the Chechen capital of Grozny, Russian forces largely demolished the city thanks to thermobaric weapons. By creating a massive fireball with combusting fuel, the bomb can kill or maim people who might have otherwise been protected behind cover or in buildings. Reports from Ukraine have shown that even in the modern day, thermobaric weapons are among the chief worries on the battlefield because of their destructive power. And while the Russians may have a terrifying weapon that is very visible, the number 1 spot goes to a US one that can destroy anything without ever being seen. Number 1. B-2 Stealth Bomber. Though initially envisioning a fleet of more than 100 of these aircrafts, the U.S. eventually had to settle for just 21 of them due to the huge price tag. At a cost of around $2 billion per aircraft, the B-2 is the most expensive and most advanced aircraft the U.S. military has ever fielded. With the capability of carrying around 20 tons of bombs, the B-2 is well equipped to destroy any target anywhere in the world. That's because the B-2, with its aerial refueling capabilities, can destroy any conventional target anywhere and not even get seen. And that's not to mention that this beast can also carry nuclear bombs. This makes the B-2 every dictator and terrorist's worst nightmare, no matter where they hide. Which weapon on this list do you think would send the most shockwaves on the battlefield? Think there's an even deadlier weapon of mass destruction out there? Let us know in the comments and let's see which weapon reigns supreme. Now go check out the most insane weapons the U.S. military is actually using today, or click on this video instead.